Good evening and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for Tuesday, May 8th, 2012. I'm Christopher Conover. Education funding makes up more than half of the state budget, but advocates say the funding level isn't enough and a dedicated source is needed. The Arizona Education Parents Network is working to renew and make permanent the 1-cent sales tax passed by voters in 2010 to help support education. Arizona Public Media's Michael Chihawk spoke with the group's leader, Pedersen.
Arizonans in 2010 voted to tax themselves to fund education. That 1-cent sales tax expires next year, and there's a move afoot to ask voters to approve a new 1-cent tax for education and other programs. Joining me to discuss it is Pedersen, a Tucsonan who is president of the Arizona Education Parents Network, which is leading the effort. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
Tell us what the Quality Education and Jobs Act is all about.
Well, what this will do is it'll renew the 1 cent that voters overwhelmingly approved in 2010, and it will dedicate those funds, 80% of them, specifically to education. It will also prevent the legislature from making any further cuts to K-12 education, so we will be investing in education across the spectrum, K-12, vocational education, community colleges, and universities.
Now, you need 172,000, almost 173,000 signatures by July to get it on the ballot in November. How's that drive going?
You know, it's going really well. We're already at 90,000 signatures. We have probably, 6,000 volunteer petitions out in the field right now. This is an amazing grassroots effort. We have people across the state, volunteers who are helping us circulate the petitions. We have paid circulators as well. And I have to tell you, just from personally circulating these petitions, people literally stand in line to sign this. I've had to have 4 different boards going at the same time. So this really resonates with voters.
Now, reaction to your effort is mixed, at least among political types. I interviewed several legislators this week in Phoenix for this program and talked about educational funding, and I asked them specifically about this initiative proposal. And here's what one of them, House Appropriations Chair John Kavanaugh, had to say.
I'm doubly against that. First, it's not extending the current tax. The current tax gives the money to the general fund, and we're free to spend it where we need. This group is really a amalgam of special interests. And I guess those interests pretty much divvied up where the money would go, to the point where, because they're getting some cash from highway construction people, they have a highway spending mandate in there. That's not the way to budget.
Now, your reaction to his comments, especially, is this a special interest initiative?
Well, Mike, I would just have to say, if school children are a special interest group, then yes, it is benefiting school children. This is being put forward by parents. We started this effort, we're leading this effort, and it's because people like Mr. Kavanaugh have not been doing their job. We wish this was not necessary, but they have defunded education over the past 4 years to the tune of $1 billion. And this is hurting not just school children, but our state's economy, and that's why business leaders are also lining up to support this. Our group of CEOs in Tucson, the SALC group, Southern Arizona Leadership, has recently endorsed the initiative. So it's going to benefit everyone, school children and all Arizonans alike.
Now, there's another issue related to this that came up in a separate interview I did in Phoenix with another legislator, Representative Chester Crandall, who brought up a constitutional issue in relation to it. Let's see what he had to say.
I think one of the problems, through the initiative process, people think they're doing a good thing by going out and passing those kind of things. One of the things that I have a fear in this one is that it ties the legislature's hands.
Now, Representative Crandall was making reference to the constitutional mandate or constitutional authority that the legislature has to make appropriations. Your response to that?
Another constitutional requirement that the legislature has is to adequately fund education. And they have been consistently neglecting that constitutional duty. So in this case, we're actually going to help them meet that constitutional requirement by giving funds so that we can adequately fund education in the state. When he talks about tying the legislature's hands, I just have to point out that the legislature is tying their own hands with regard to the budget. Yesterday, they approved $538 million in tax cuts. Last year, another $500 million in tax cuts. So we are, in essence, depleting the general fund to the tune of $1 billion. So the legislature is really tying their own hands when it comes to appropriations.
That billion you refer to from the tax cuts last year and this year would roll out over the next 6, 7, 8 years.
That's right.
So rather than this kind of an effort, Anne-Eve, why wouldn't you work toward electing legislators who might want to support education in a greater way?
You know, Mike, we've tried that. In fact, our group, we formed in 2009, and that was our sole effort, was to try and reach out to legislators. And we kept hearing from them again and again that education was not a priority to them. And we saw that in their votes. It's just going to take too long. And we can't let a generation of school children lose out while we're waiting for the legislature to change. I wish that were the option that we had. We tried it. It didn't work. We have no other alternative. And you know, the public does not trust the legislature to adequately fund education. In a poll that we did, 75% of voters said they had no confidence that the legislature would invest in education as revenues increased, as our economy improves. And in fact, the budget that was just passed reflects that. The governor had asked for a modest increase. The legislature initially zeroed it out. Then they really just sort of threw a bone to education. So they're never going to do this. We're going to have to do it for them.
Well, we have a clip from another legislator to support that, and in fact, just for the sake of fairness, to show that there are some in the legislature who do support the idea of changing the funding formula. And this is from Senate Minority Leader David Shapira, a Democrat.
This legislature clearly has not shown the political will to adequately fund education. And so if it has to go to the voters, and the voters have to make the decision on behalf of the legislature, since the legislature is unwilling to come up with the political will to do it, then that's what has to happen.
Expanding on what you said, that's where you're trying to go, is taking the initiative on this with an initiative because you're not seeing the legislature do it.
That's absolutely right. And again, this really resonates with voters. They want to do this. They know how critical it is to our economy that we improve education in Arizona. If we're going to get good quality jobs here, if we're going to keep the employers that we have to send a signal to the rest of the country that Arizona is open for business. And we do that by making education a priority in Arizona. So Arizona voters are incredibly pragmatic and practical, and it's always heartening to know that they support education and they are willing to do this.
Anne-Eve Pedersen of the Arizona Education Parent Network, thanks for being with me.
Thank you, Mike.
The Bowl Championship Series, which helps determine a college football national champion, is undergoing some changes. It's often criticized, so the changes are welcomed by many. Robert Shelton, the former president of the University of Arizona, is now in charge of the Fiesta Bowl in Tempe. It's one of the BCS members. He recently sat down with our sister station, KAET in Phoenix, to talk about the upcoming changes.
The controversial BCS system used to determine a college football champion appears to be history. The BCS has approved, in principle, a new 4-team championship series starting in 2014. The new head of the Fiesta Bowl, Robert Shelton, is here to talk about the proposed championship system. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Ted, thank you for having me. I like the term new. I've been at it 9 months now, so I appreciate you're keeping me young.
Well, considering you had the tenure at Bowl, you're pretty good there, pretty new there. But this playoffs, what did the BCS agree to?
Well, I want to emphasize that there has been no conclusion yet. Remember, this is a group of commissioners and the AD at Notre Dame, and they have been working rapidly, slowly, depending on your point of view, and it looks like they are now focused on some kind of a 4-team playoff configuration as different from the current BCS.
How would the final 4 teams be decided?
That is still up in the air. There are discussions about, of course, a set of polls, just taking the top 4. There's a discussion that in addition to that, you have to win your conference. There's good comments about how you get the, for lack of a better term, smaller conferences, making sure they have access, where we were, say, the Boise States.
Sure.
So all of these factors are still in play. I think the one thing we can count on is it's now zeroing in on 4 teams as the focal point.
You say still in play, and yet people will want to know, national rankings, will they be a factor? Will these polls be a factor? Because, boy, people were upset with those 2 factors in the BCS.
Well, I think you're going to have some way to determine who's 1, who's 2, who's 3, and who's 4, and that means a series of polls. Do you want computers? Do you want coaches? Do you want the AP? There is no doubt when you get into social choice that you can't please all the people all the time. But
okay, with that in mind, will all schools have equal access to the championship? And how do you do that?
I think all schools are going to have access, but you got to finish in the top 4.
How do you do that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Let's say you come from one of the power conferences. Now, you play within your conference a number of tough games, SEC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12, ACC, you name it. What are you going to schedule outside your conference? Are you going to schedule other tough teams so strength of schedule comes into the polls? Or if the polls don't take into account strength of schedule, are you going to schedule, shall we say, less challenging opponents? So a lot of the scheduling is going to revolve around how you determine those top 4.
Now, can you look at basketball, at the basketball championship, the March Madness, the Final Four, the whole 9 yards, and look, those teams are all seated. They got a committee somewhere in a room somewhere figuring out who's number 1 and who's number 16. Will that be somewhat similar, do you think?
I doubt they're going there. It's real difference in picking 64, 68 teams, who knows how many it'll be next year, and picking 4. There's a lot of heat over the difference between 4 and 5, less heat, the difference between 68 and 69.
Okay, let's get to local concerns here. Where would these games be played? Let's go with the Final Four. Where would those semifinals and the final be played?
Well, there are, again, still options. One option might be that you play them in the 4 current BCS bowls, where you would alternate a semifinal and then your regular opponents, and then a semifinal and a regular opponents, right? You're going to have 2 semifinals, 4 bowl games, so every other year you'd have a semifinal. The championship game could be in those bowls. There's a lot of sentiment right now to bid that championship game out. Hopefully the greater Phoenix metropolitan area would be aggressive and strong in that bid, and I've already talked to some people. There's some sentiment for playing at least the semifinal rounds on the home field of the higher-ranked team. Mm-hmm. I don't particularly like that. I don't think you have the right infrastructure at all these home sites. I think that last year, for example, giving Stillwater, Oklahoma State, an all-expenses-paid trip to Tuscaloosa might not have been in the best interest of college football, with all due respect to Alabama, the reigning national champ. So nothing has been settled on this, but these are all possibilities they're thinking about. The good news is they seem to have iterated to 4 teams, and now you only have about 25 other variables that you have to deal with on those four teams.
What about the Fiesta Bowl? Where do you stand in all this?
We have been very upfront, very assertive, talking to the commissioners, talking to some of the presidents on the BCS Presidential Oversight Group, certainly talking to Bill Hancock, who runs the BCS, about what we bring. We bring value added. Locally, it's well known that we have a volunteer cast of thousands that are second to none. We've got a destination that people love. You've got the Valley of the Sun. You've got all these municipalities with the resorts, with the activities that are going on. You don't have ice dropping off of your arena or tornadoes to worry about. This is a place that people love to come, and it's because of the infrastructure. Kudos to all the municipalities around here that put it together. And we can really claim, I think, as no other site can, to being a genuinely neutral site.
Can you, though, get past the past? Get past the past, in other words. I mean, is that a speed bump? Is that a handicap? Added weight?
That is gone. Everybody I talk to, I've gone around and met with all the commissioners, and they say, don't even worry about that. That's done. You've handled it. You've got a board in. You've got bylaws. You've set up a governance structure that's the envy of bowls around the country. Let's talk about the future.
All right. Let's talk about the reaction of the commissioners. Let's talk about the football conferences. And what happens if a consensus, obviously it's kind of vague right now, but once you get things fine-tuned, what if a consensus isn't reached?
Well, they will definitely somehow. That's up to them. I told them they have a very tough job when I had my 1-on-30 meeting with them in Florida last week. They will reach a consensus. They know they have to. I think they're going to reach it before the July 4th holiday. And then these options, plural, that they will decide on will go to the BCS Presidential Oversight Group, and that will be the final deciding group, probably sometime in the summer.
Will we hear more details? Because what you said right now, you have a lot of options, but when do we get something a little harder and faster?
Well, I know the commissioners will meet later this month of May, and the presidents are going to be meeting at the end of June, so I think those are key dates to look for some more specifics coming out.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds encouraging.
I'm encouraged. It's not done. We certainly don't control our own fate. But people are very receptive, and they know that the Fiesta Bowl is a place where teams and fans and donors and supporters like to come.
Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
To end the war with Hitler, America would cross a moral divide.
And that moral threshold is we will not deliberately bomb civilians.
There would be a bridge to hit, a factory. You never thought about any human being there.
We had to make some choices that were in some ways regrettable.
The most unethical act in World War II for the Allies would have been allowing themselves to lose.
The bombing of Germany on American Experience.
Tonight at 8 on PBS HD, Arizona Public Media.
In 1961, mixed-race groups of young people embarked on what was termed the Freedom Rides. Their goal was to directly, but non-violently, challenge the separate but equal public accommodation laws. Tucson resident Jim Zwerg was one of those Freedom Riders. Tom Klesby brings us his story.
I knew full well that probably if anybody was going to get killed, it would be me. Or I'd be certainly one of them. But there are things worth dying for. So I got on the bus.
Originally from Wisconsin, Jim Zwerg had never experienced racism firsthand until he enrolled in predominantly black Fisk University in Nashville. His deep faith required him to try to right the wrongs his black classmates endured. Spurred by the brutal and nearly fatal attacks on an original group of Freedom Riders in Alabama, Jim got on the next bus, against the advice of even the most preeminent civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr.
They all said, don't do it. It's a suicide trip. You're going to get killed. Those of us that were selected to go on that first bus, and I knew in my heart I was going to be, all wrote letters to be sent to our loved ones in the event of our death. We knew what to expect. We were willing to die for what we believed.
The Freedom Riders believed in equality and dignity. Many Southerners, including government and law enforcement officials, didn't. After arrest and jail in Birmingham, the next planned stop was Montgomery.
So we spent the night of the 19th in the bus station with the Klan, walking, marching in front of the place and in their robes, and every once in a while they'd come in and stamp on your feet or whatever. But the next morning, then we got on the bus. At that point, we had been promised protection, and we had it. And the police commissioner of Montgomery had said he would also provide protection. But we hit the city limits, and the protection disappeared. And the closer we got to the bus terminal, all activity disappeared.
Once inside the bus terminal, the 15 Freedom Riders were surrounded by an angry horde of hundreds of rioters, and no police protection. The rioters first attacked a news photographer and his sound man.
And that seemed to be the cue for the mob. Because from around the bus bays, up the driveways, came this mob, screaming at the tops of their lungs, get them, kill the niggers, get the niggers. And you could see the weapons in their hands. You could just see the hatred in their faces. And I figured, this is it. So I bowed my head and I prayed. And I asked God to be with me, to give me the strength to remain nonviolent, and to forgive them. And in that instant, I had the most incredible religious experience in my life. I felt a presence with me. There was a calm. There was this overwhelming feeling of love. And I knew in that instant that whether I lived or whether I died, it was going to be okay. And I don't think I even was able to mouth amen. I was grabbed and pulled over a railing and thrown to the ground. Got to all fours to try and get back with the group and got kicked in my spine. And that threw me forward over onto my back, and a foot came down in my face, and that's basically the last thing I remember.
Jim was denied prompt medical assistance, supposedly because there were no white ambulances available.
We'll take hitting, we'll take beating.
He spent 5 days in the hospital.
We're willing to accept death.
2 in a coma.
My injuries were such that I could not continue the ride. I was no more heroic than anybody else. I mean, we believed in what we were doing. It was an incredible period in my life, not just the ride, but my time in the movement. I was never so spiritually alive. My faith was never so strong. I feel truly blessed to have been able to be a part of it.
Not deterred by his beating, in September of 1961, Jim contemplated his future.
And that we are going to continue.
He sought Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s counsel.
And I was seriously wrestling with that, of whether or not to drop out of school totally and dedicate my life to the movement. And Dr. King said, Jim, go into the ministry, follow your education, complete it, go to seminary. You will touch many, many lives. And I took him at his word, and I did so.
Student filmmakers in Arizona work together to find creative ways to shoot visual stories with little or no budget in hopes of someday making a career out of their craft. With tonight's video postcard, we take you behind the scenes of a local production to take a look at what it takes to make a film.
I can't wrap my head around it.
Around what?
I think that Tucson is a good place, to start out, just to, like I said, gain experience, because I don't think I don't think that anybody will really condemn me for what I've done here, you know, whether it's good or bad work. So it's just like a stepping stone, I suppose.
Well, anything's possible, right?
We chose to shoot down in Sonoyta because we have land down here, and so it's free, and it looks quite different from Tucson, and the weather's always perfect, and it always works out nice for what we're shooting. So,
you know, real filmmakers, I think, can just make the product no matter what and tell the story as they want it to be told, regardless of a budget. Because, you know, these days you can buy an HD camera for literally $100, and so I think that people who, you know, blame the equipment or just say like, oh, I can't make this movie the way I want it to be, just aren't creative enough, and that's why I like working with these guys.
Across the universe, billions of miles away.
Picking the right tools for the film is pretty tricky, especially when you don't have a budget. Lighting, you know, of course, is really essential, so I'll have to use makeshift lights and reflect a lot of light because we only have like 2 lights or 3 lights. When we did the moon scene in this film, I think we only had like 3 lights. So we had to do a lot of reflecting, a lot of visual effects to get rid of direct light and make sure it looked like a real moonlight hitting the characters.
Do you think they're in love?
Well, I don't know.
For this short in particular, we prepared by having read-throughs. We would get the actors, sit them down, we'd have them read through the script, and it's kind of like a rehearsal without actually being on location and rehearsing. In other ways, we actually have rehearsals where we set up the shots, we set up the lights, we run through before we take a take, and then we roll on a rehearsal just in case we like it or if they got it.
The more that we get to experiment with our own filmmaking styles, the more it really shines through as a better product. And I think everything we've done has gotten significantly better every step of the way.
As always, you can get more news and information on our website, azpm.org. You can also comment on any story you saw tonight. Just click on the story online and scroll down to the bottom of the page. We can also be reached via Facebook and Twitter. Coming up tomorrow night, we continue our look at the state budget with a focus on children's health care. We'll also get an update on the construction of Tucson's modern streetcar line. I'm Christopher Conover. Have a good night.